Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back to another interview on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. This is a project by the ISKCON Ministry of Education. Books are the basis. And today we are very happy and honored to have with us His Holiness Janananda Goswami Maharaj. Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, everybody. My obeisances to you all. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to remember the fundamentally, practically speaking, most important part, one of the most important part of our service to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank Krishna Prema Rupa Prabhu and his team for serving our movement in this wonderful way. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you for taking your time to share your realization on this topic. Most of our viewers will know Maharaj, but just a short introduction. Maharaj was born in the UK, in England, started to practice Krishna consciousness in 1971 and joined ISKCON Soho Temple it was Soho Temple, right, Maharaj?
Bury place.
Bury place, of course. Yeah, at that time it was Bury place.
Soho Temple, that was something else. I won't mention.
In 72, Bury place. And Maharaj has been, over the years, then later on, served in various countries around the world. Of course, in the UK, also in Africa, Malaysia, Philippines, New Zealand, in Europe. Also teach at the VIHG, and has started to serve as an ISKCON Diksha Guru in 2005, and later accepted sannyas in 2007 in Sri Vrindavan Dham, and has been extensively preaching and traveling, encouraging, inspiring devotees. And the last around 5 years, Maharaj especially focused on ISKCON France to help the devotees there to develop the yatra, and stays at the moment at a new Mayapur project, which is a project Prabhupada had visited 3 times and installed Krishna Balaram deities there. And Maharaj is well known for his enthusiasm, kirtan, dancing, and also for his wonderful sense of humor. So thank you so much, Maharaj, joining us for this conversation. Maybe we can start hearing from you, because it's about the books. So how did you join, in a sense? What was the first book that you received, and how did that book inspire you to take up Krishna consciousness? Do you?
Well, to keep it brief, before I ever heard or came in contact with ISKCON or Gaudiya Vaishnavism, it was a thing to do, at least at the college I was at, was to read philosophical books, particularly from India.
Oh.
So we were reading at college in 1971, not Prabhupada, not ISKCON, not Gaudiya Vaishnava, but the usual books, Ramayana, Mahabharata, various Bhagavad Gitas and other literatures, which you could say created a bit of a spark of interest amongst us in something cosmic, something beyond, say, the norm, some supernatural or esoteric, whatever you want to call it. And coupled with debased activities such as experimentation with hallucinatory drugs, which was a common affair in those days. It was almost, you had to do it, you didn't have to, but it was mostly the thing to do. Somehow or another, it's a long story, I won't tell it, but somehow it brought me to a reunion of not so transcendental, but cosmic experimenters in the subject matter of, LSD, etc. So I vowed never to touch the stuff again. When I read other books, be it the Bible or Vedic books of some kind, misinterpreted or whatever, it created a deep interest in something and awoken something, that there is something more than what we see with our mundane eyes, or what we hear from mundaners in educational or scientific circles. So when I went with my friends for this kind of reunion in the middle of 71 somewhere, I was bored because they were still very much inclined towards these other practices. And I was looking for something to do. I did have then, in those days, I had a taste for reading. And I was looking for something interesting to read. And there was nothing I could find in their apartment which really interested me anymore. And then at the bottom of a big pile of magazines, I found two magazines which were very different to normal. And I didn't know, what is this? They were called Back to Godhead. And those were the first two connections I ever had with ISKCON, or with Prabhupada, if you want to call it a book or what you want to call it, it's up to you. But those were the first things I ever read. And it really turned everything, not totally around, but it directed everything completely in a clear direction. Just reading those two magazines tonight, I read them back and forth. Immediately, it like turned on a switch. Now, it was Prabhupada's lectures. Don't tell me what lecture, but this is magazines from 1970. And one of them had a picture on the back of Palambasur being smacked on the head by Balaram. And I was like this all black city, basically speaking. I couldn't believe that they were distributing in this all black city, all black people. And there's a black man being smacked with a white man. But it was fascinating. On the front was a picture of a little Radha Krishna deities, I believe. One had a Rasa Leela dance. Different, far out, you could say, I mean, they were just not of this world. Is a little bit, we were a little bit like that, I suppose. But it really, I mean, when I started reading, they were solid. In those days, it wasn't like a little article. They were just almost with some black and white pictures. Otherwise, solid black and white reading, page after page. But I couldn't stop it. It wasn't just Prabhupada, Satsrup Maharaj, Kirtananda Maharaj, Rupanuga, I don't know, all kinds of Damodar, all kinds of devotee articles were in there. And it was really amazing. And frankly speaking, that was it. That just turned on the switch. And without seeing a devotee, I'd never seen a devotee. I only got an idea what they looked like from the magazine. They looked like Buddhist monks. And that was all I could say. But then the next thing that turned me on is, you say, books. So I'll tell you the next book I got. I was on my way to the temple. I was just maybe 3 or 4 weeks later after that, I found my way to London to go to the Bury Place Temple. So on the way, I stopped off at one of our favorite bookshops in Tottenham Court Road, or just off Tottenham Court Road, esoteric bookshops selling all kinds of Eastern and stuff like that, books. And I was looking, maybe there's something about in the same vein as this with a magazine. And I found one Krishna book in there, a big, they were 2 volumes in those days. So I bought one of these big, beautiful, it has a picture, I think is it Natwar, I think, on the front, a big picture of Krishna in that unique form. On the front, a red, kind of reddish color, silver, beautiful silver, big writing, and these amazing pictures, which just, you can't help but keep looking at them and wonder, where's this coming from? And so I bought it. But when I got home, I actually was going to the temple to buy one of their Bhagavad Gitas, but they didn't have any. They had none at the temple. And so I went back home with just this Krishna book. Then I noticed it was volume 2. So I thought, oh no, I can't start reading this until I get volume 1. I was in the farm at the time. And anyway, later on I did get volume 1. So that was my first book, the Christian book. I just look at it every night, look at the pictures, glance through it. It was just like I don't know what you say, a magnetic draw to another dynamic, another dimension, another world. It was incredible. That was my first book. Hare Krishna.
Do you remember anything? I mean, you mentioned about the BTG, but do you remember something reading from Prabhupada that really kind of catch your attention from that
specific thing? I can't say it was Prabhupada. I didn't know the difference between Prabhupada and any of the others. It wasn't like there was all, to me, it was I didn't know anything. Sure. I didn't know what his divine grace meant, it's like, it didn't mean anything to me. I was just reading it. And I can't remember anything specific. Maybe if I thought deeper, I might, but I can't remember it. All I can say is everything that I read made sense. Everything I said fitted. Everything I said seemed to have a direction. It wasn't like there was nothing contradictory in there. It was clear. Everything seemed quite clear. You know, it just like turned a light on a lot of hazy subject matters, which we've been, you know, speculating about. It just like, it was so clear. The most profound thing that I read there, and in fact, the very next morning, I started to apply it, was the Maha Mantra. Yes. I'd heard it before, but without any conscious kind of like consideration on top of the pops or somewhere in some books we used to read, Be Here Now, or this one and that one, you know, autobiography of the Bogey Yogi, I mean, and so many things like that. And you come across it, but it didn't stick, you know, it's just another thing that goes by you as you read. But now it's stuck like glue. I mean, not like glue, like, you know, you couldn't get, it couldn't go away. I just started chanting the next morning. It was just whatever way, it was sort of, you know, we chanted a few mantras before, but this was it. That was it. I just was convinced that this is it. Wow. This Maha Mantra is it. And that's what really came through, honestly speaking, from reading those magazines. Chant Hare Krishna. And I started chanting Hare Krishna, as simple as that. One other thing that really attracted me there, and right from the word go, there was an article something about New Vrindavan. And that really attracted my attention because it was a community and it seemed like a trans and spiritual community. You know, whatever happened there happened, but the principle was so attractive, so attractive. Those two things at this moment of my life is what I can remember. Obviously, everything else was a part of it.
So later on, you joined the ashram, and do you remember something from the early days, the reading?
Oh, do I remember something?
I mean, in regards to the book.
Come on, that's a dangerous question, boy. A loaded question. Okay, we'll try to keep it in line with the subject matter, okay?
What's the culture of there a lot of reading going on, or not so much reading?
Well, the first thing was I had about 3 books. I had Krishna book, volume 1 and 2 in the Bhagavad Gita when I joined, okay? So I brought them with me. And in 72, Bury Place was an amazing, I mean, anyone who was there will tell you, it was just incredible. If that was not an oasis in this world, nothing it was. It was just incredible. Now, as soon as I came, they shaved me up straight away, as usual, and put saffron on straight away. And they gave me one little box to keep all my things, which weren't many anyway. Everyone had a little carton, like a tea chest little box. And they were piled on top of each other. No door, just open-ended. And I put my things in there. And the next morning, my books were no longer there. Oh, disappeared. So that was the end of them. I never saw them again. And anything of value just kind of disappeared. It wasn't like, you know, someone stole it exactly. It just either got distributed to somebody else. Everything was kind of communal, you know. You didn't realize that until you found out. It didn't take long to find out. Books, everything, toothbrush, everything communal. And books just disappeared, so I never saw them again. So there were no books. At that time, the Bury Place Temple, they didn't have any books for distribution. We had BTG only. So there were no books. There was only 1 copy of each book. And they were reading. And I remember we used to have, this is amazing. This is, to me, one of the things which is very, very different in our temples nowadays, at least where I go, is that we were having 5 classes a day. Can you dig that? 5 classes every day. Now, we didn't have books. So if you wanted to hear nectar devotion, you had to go to class. There were no tape recorders. There were no Kindles. There were no mobiles. There were no computers. It was class or nothing. You had to go there because there was no other book. There was an odd Krishna book lying around here and there. But, you know, basically, Bhagavatam, 1 copy, the old, you know, the Prabhupada's one that he brought from India was there. But that was kept by the TP, as far as I remember, locked up. And you just come down for class. And it was no books. Nectar devotion, we'd have a class every day on nectar devotion. You know, we'd take it after a few weeks in a temple. I had to give class on nectar devotion. After maybe 2 or 3 weeks, Rabbananda Swami sat there in front of me. You know, you were really thrown in there. And Ishopanishad every day, Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, songbook every day, class on songbook, Krishna book reading every day, like that every day, scheduled. It wasn't just, spontaneous. It was part of the day. So you really tuned in. You really tuned in to hearing. I was listening to Prabhupada by Krishna's arrangement this morning, lectures. Prabhupada was saying, in previous ages, there were no books. There were no need of books. People learned. There was no need to study like that. They simply heard and remembered. And I'll tell you, when you're put into that situation, you remember a lot better than when you're left to your own means just to, read when you want. At least that's my experience. That was your only chance to hear. It was really amazing. Of course, books came about April 72 or something. Books started to arrive and, it was easy to access. But for the first couple of months there, it was like that, It was an amazing experience. Classes were attended by 100% of the devotees, whatever they were, unless you were cooking, cleaning, or you had some other service. You were there for every single class.
Wow.
It was a great foundation, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's very inspiring to hear that education and that hearing was so much in the center in that early days.
Oh, totally.
It's amazing.
Even in the kitchen, devotees, the older ones, those who've been in the movement more than 2 weeks, they would be talking like, did you hear that story from Krishna? Because they read it and you hadn't read it, Dana Kasura, they were so excited, Do you know that? I'll tell you, the first thing turned me on. Okay, I was coming as a guest. There's a devotee in our movement named Bhakti National Shingamaraj. He was Bershinga in those days. And he was far out. And he was the first devotee to preach to me and open up the Bhagavad Gita. He said, look at this verse. And that verse stuck with me. That was the first Gita verse that really stuck with me. Yavan arta udapane sarvatak sampladodike. You know that verse? I'm sure you do. All purposes that are served, by a small pond are served by a great reservoir. Similarly, one who knows the purpose of the Vedas, knows the Vedas, everything's revealed. And that really turned my heart because I realized that all pleasure comes from Krishna. Everything else is just a reflection of that pleasure. It's so clear. Anyway, that's my first remembrance of a statement in one of Prabhupada's books.
Wonderful to hear about these early days and your experiences. Maybe let's start with just a question of, in general, why it is important to read Prabhupada's books regularly. What would you say? Why it's important?
Well, okay. Putting aside, I like. Putting aside is important to preach. You can't preach unless you hear. Putting aside maybe a few other personal things, the essential feature that we understood from the beginning is the absolute necessity to associate with a pure devotee of the Lord. Whatever we may, from our relative measurement, imperfect as it is, judge others. If we're in this movement and we don't accept Srila Prabhupada, as the founder chair of this movement, as the representative of Krishna, as the saving grace, as God on earth, practically speaking, in terms of our connection with God through Prabhupada, then we haven't quite cottoned on to being a member of ISKCON. So how on earth are we going to associate with Prabhupada? There's different ways you could say, but the most intimate, and everyone, I'm sure others have spoken on this 100 million times more and pure than I could ever think of. But, this is how we associate with Prabhupada. We can associate with us. There's many wonderful devotees. I read articles by many devotees in those magazines, and it was wonderful. But then you realize if we really want to advance, we got to associate with the topmost, Narottam, the topmost devotee, the Bhaktivedanta. So this is how we can associate with the Prabhupada. If Prabhupada were sitting in front of us now, literally I'm speaking, would we be attentive? Probably. If we have any interest in our spiritual life, we would be. So what to speak? Is Prabhupada not there in his books? Of course he is. He said, these are my ecstasies. If you want to know me, read my books. You know, I haven't got anything in front of me as far as quotes go. I haven't prepared anything. But, you know, so many devotees, and there's so many quotes here on the importance of reading these books. This is how we associate, and our advancement is solely and wholly depending on our good fortune, which means how we associate. We have to associate. This is how we associate with Prabhupada. That is our time. And it doesn't matter if you walked in the door or you're walking out the door. It doesn't matter who you are. This is how we associate with Prabhupada. And this is, he's making his presence, he's making his association available to every living entity, no matter who they are, at least the human beings anyway, making it available anywhere. These books are deities. They're living deities. And inside these books, everyone who's there, they're alive. We may not be alive, but if we pay attention, they'll pay attention to us. It's a matter of understanding, it's a matter of realization, you could say. Even without that, they're so important, it gradually grows on us. That this is our time. All the answers in his books, Prabhupada said. All the answers are there. We just have to hear it. We spend so much time, you know, picking each other's brains sometimes, trying to find the answer, but we don't hear Prabhupada. And this is how we can hear. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's, you know, I'm through the years, and right now it may not be so prominent in my life, but through the years, this is how we lived and how we felt, that this is our permanent connection with Prabhupada. Prabhupada never left. He's as present now as he ever was and ever will be in his books, his teachings. And it's not just a book, it's actually, you know, massaging. It's like massaging Prabhupada's lotus feet when you read these books with attention.
Wow. That's beautifully put. Basically, you just mentioned how we need to have the proper attitude towards these books, understanding that they give us access to Srila Prabhupada, and that we can associate with him through studying and reading. It's also said that when we study and read Prabhupada's books, it helps us to sharpen our intelligence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's we speak of this Shastra Chakshu, that we develop a certain vision. We start to see the world through the eyes of Shastra. You'd like to share some realization on this point?
Okay, well, I don't know if I can, but I'll try to say something. Well, just a little bit on what you so nicely said there. Sharp, because Prabhupada's own words, it sharpens our intelligence, of course. I mean, if you were in a position and Prabhupada was in his room and you had any, you know, doubts or confusions, and you go into his room, if you're one of those fortunate souls who got that chance, once in my life happened, but you went into his room alone with Prabhupada, you know, it's clearly, Prabhupada would just, you know, single, you know, kick of his toe or whatever Prabhupada said, I would kick out all your doubts. You would be clarified. And if you didn't accept it, you know, it's your problem. But it's the same thing with the books. When you went to your room, in Prabhupada's room, it's like going into Prabhupada's room, literally, to his inner quarters. These books are Prabhupada's inner quarters. So what was your question again? Sharpening intelligence, and what was the other part?
Yeah, how these books sharpen the intelligence, and also
sharpen the intelligence. Okay.
It's Shastra Chakshu, how we develop this.
Yeah. How to it? Well, this is it, association, because our intelligence all the time, you know, especially if you're a Sankirtan book distributor or anything. I mean, it doesn't matter what service we're doing. There's this tendency to drift away and forget the goal. Now, one thing in Prabhupada's books again and again is like emphasizing the goal of our lives. Now, the thing that sticks out in my mind, probably as much as anything, if not more, is attention. Intelligence, you know, if you ever see Atmakara here, K. Kurunandana, Prabhupada's, you know, one of his flagmas, what do you call it, verses, you know, in his mission to fix the intelligence, or focus the intelligence on the objective goal. And one of my favorite purports, one of them, it's in the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam, and maybe it's the last verse or last but one verse. So when Srila Goswami says, now here with rapt attention. That's what it means. It means our intelligence is not drifting away, following the mind's pictures, but focusing the mind on on Prabhupada, on the words that Prabhupada is speaking. And if we hear that, and of course it's accompanied with behavior and so many things, but ultimately to hear this Bhagavatam with rapt attention, one will see Krishna on the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And if our intelligence is drifting, and what can we say? Arjuna's intelligence was drifting, and Krishna, he brought it back. So because Arjuna, Prabhupada said we should hear in the mood of Arjuna, was attentive to Krishna. So being attentive to these transcendental shastras, Krishna takes charge of our intelligence and reminds us of our goal. So even if the mind drifts off and our intelligence, our mind's always wandering, but the intelligence drifts off with the mind, then just by, again, everyone's experienced this, especially if you're a book distributor, you sit down with the Prabhupada, and Prabhupada straightens you out again. Thus, with sword in hand, intelligent men cut through the labyrinthine knots of reactionary work. How do they do it? By remembering the Lord. Prabhupada just reminds you, it just brings us back to the purpose of our being here. Every word that Prabhupada speaks brings us back to our goal. And this is, you could say, maybe at my neophyte stage, I've got no realization of this subject matter, but if the more we're attentive to Prabhupada, the more we can, because Prabhupada living these is a living thing. Shastra Chakshusi is trying to give this sort of knowledge to us, but when you read Krishna books, he's living those pastimes. And the more we're attentive to Prabhupada, it's like more you're in those pastimes too, with Prabhupada. I don't know, cutting that. Yeah, just bringing our consciousness or our intelligence back to why we came to this movement. Sometimes it's good to look back and see why we came to this movement. We didn't come to this movement for political reasons, or to fill our belly, or to get a name and fame and prestige. We came to this movement. In most cases, we were searching for something. Maybe other reasons mixed in there. We came here. We wanted to be whatever Krishna conscious is. And this is how we can continually, we need to go forward. Now, I'm going to tell you the honest truth. I read less now than I did 50 years ago. It's a disgrace, but I can just say for everyone else, that try not, I remember when I took sannyas, sometime after sannyas, one of my godbrothers said to me, he said, please spend as much time as you can, because he fell away from sannyas later on. He said, spend as much time as you can reading Prabhupada's books. And those words are now ringing in my mind. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a service. It's just, okay, if we want to put it in practical terms, it's a service also to Prabhupada. But it's much more than just that. That makes it sound like it's some mechanical or regulative factor, which you can also use, and it can be very helpful. I know when I was with Keshava Bharati Maharaj years and years ago, that was quite an eye-opening experience. Let's say I don't know this eye, but some eye-opening experience. We were talking, I've got to stop now. I haven't finished my reading for the day, 40 pages of Bhagavatam. Started reading, that was the end of our meeting, So the next hour, it was just reading. And after that, for about a year and a half, I was reading 40 pages a day of Prabhupada's books. I finished the whole Bhagavatam and churned into the CC for a while there. And then I got caught up in management. What to do? It was a great experience, It was some amazing experience. I mean, it was just like, Maya was just like there, but it was like you had a shield. Prabhupada was there as your shield, about Shastra Chakra. It was a shield, sword and shield in hand, well, it says right there, it says, it says with sword in hand, it's like being with sword in hand, because it just keeps coming up. Even when you're sleeping, it comes up in your sleep, Your mind wanders, boom, it comes back. It's so important to bring us back. At least I'm a neophyte. Others may be absorbed in the pastimes and just churning the pastimes in their reading, but not quite me. Not yet. Maybe one lifetime. But it's, I'll tell you one thing. I remember one time I was with Rancho Prabhu. in London. And this stands out a lot. I was reading, he was driving. And I don't know, it was like Prabhupada came so much into our presence. It was such, he gave us so much mercy. It was just so, and it's so, okay, it's self-centered maybe, but we felt so blissful. And it was just like something I never experienced before, just reading and hearing. So I think it was Bhagavatam we were reading, but it was so ecstatic. You know, that higher taste, you know, otherwise the mind wants to hear some other rubbish, you know. You just have to hear it. And gradually, we want to hear more and more and more. Tasmade Kena Manasa. Yeah.
I like how you answer the question in regards to the sharpening intelligence. Basically, by hearing again and again from Prabhupada, we always get reminded of our goal, the sadhya, what we actually want to achieve, and that's kind of a sign of intelligence by always remembering that goal. That's a beautiful point you made.
Hearing Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, especially Bhagavatam, Shisi, and so whatever. But hearing is, as you said, sadhya, it may be a sadhana, but it's both sadhana and sadhya. It's not something that disappears like at a certain time. It should increase. Realizations, the more you read, it's like, I'm sure everyone's had that experience. It's like you're reading it for number one, first time. Each time you read it, it's like the first time you've read it. It's an incredible experience because, it's through slightly different vision, slightly different perspective. Another reason that you could say, and for me anyway, because we were dropped in the deep end. And, if you wanted the class, at least in the beginning, you had to kind of, the first few months we didn't have books, and after that, you had to read, you had to, it was an incentive to read. When you preach Krishna consciousness, whether it's public or internal, when you preach, you've got to use this knowledge. You can't just sit on it. You've got to, otherwise no realizations will come. And it can become dry. It can become more like gyan rather than bhakti. We've got to use that, what we hear. We've got to share it with others. This is one secret, which I don't think it's a secret. I think it's just a reminder that it's very important to share what we hear with others. I used to love reading, to people in general. And I think you may know that, I don't know. But when I was at the VIHE, every lunchtime, we used to read. It was a common thing. We'd read during breakfast, something going back to the early days. Breakfast, lunch, evening meal, whatever it is, somebody would be reading from Prabhupada's books. Now, not everybody's cup of tea. You can say, no, I appreciate that some devotees have other things on their agendas, but it was a great experience. And whenever you get the chance, pick up a book and read it. Don't waste time. If we waste time, Krishna is time. Then Krishna he will not reveal himself in time. But he's there. We just shouldn't waste a second.
Maybe we could talk a little bit more about this aspect of preaching. I really love the point you made that in order to realize the knowledge or not to lose it, we need to give it again to others. And you have been known as someone who is very much inspiring and encouraging young devotees also to do books, to do Harinam, public preaching. How would you like to share something more on that? The importance of sharing Krishna consciousness, but you also need to read before you can share, and that connection.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I could share something with, purity and realization, maybe a little passion or something is there in my presentation. But it's, again, we would sit down, and every book distributors particularly, not so much Harinam. We would start, usually before starting Harinam, we would read something from Prabhupada's books to remind us what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Distributing Prabhupada's books is good to read something too before you start to remind us, why are we doing this? It's not to get number one on the charts and get, some praise or Mahaprasadam or whatever it is, people patting you on the back. There's many angles you could look at it, but it's so deep. Reminder is so important when we're performing Sankirtan, whatever service, not just what we call Sankirtan is everything, but in terms of book distribution, Harinam, Prasad, whatever we're trying to give out in public is so important. There is a tendency to forget. The competitive streak isn't a bad thing, but it has to be correctly directed. So when we temper it or say accompany it with regular hearing and chanting, even when you're out there on the street, sometimes Krishna reminds us by telling people not to take the books, or something happens and you're really in what's going on here today? I want to get out of here. And then Krishna's reminding me, don't forget me. Don't put yourself in the books, Prabhupada's books, because Prabhupada, unique amongst all teachers, puts Krishna in the center. My experience was, and I don't say it's everyone's realization, if you call it a realization or just a sentiment, I don't know, is that being with Prabhupada meant you were with Krishna. Prabhupada always put Krishna in the center, and every word of his books. Do you see anywhere in his books that he puts himself in the center? No, he puts others in the center. Those who are dear to Krishna and Krishna himself. And we forget that very easily. We get carried away. Oh, I'm really enjoying this Harinam today. Oh, what a nice class I'm giving today. People said it was good. Huh? Oh, what a nice article I wrote. Was it good? Oh, oh boy, there was so many books today. Whoa, or whatever it may be. It's like, we got to remember, the only purpose of all this ultimate is to please Krishna. And when you read Prabhupada's books, you can misuse anything. You can use it to try to get, anything you like. But if we're really hearing means submission. The epitome of humility. It's a tough one. To hear in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than a straw on the street, more tolerant than a tree. To hear openly, now I'm a soul surrendered to you, kindly instruct me. That surrender when we hear, it's sometimes it becomes a weapon which we use to further our agendas. Just submissive hearing, and in relation, as you said, to preaching. We preach everything a devotee does. It should be preaching. We shouldn't be doing anything unless it's in that mood of preaching, really, of sharing Krishna consciousness. So if we genuinely want to, help inspire others to awaken that flame of bhakti in their hearts, we have to have it in ours. So that comes by this association, by attentive, submissive, oral reception. The Lord will reveal himself. We become an instrument in his hands for spreading this knowledge of Krishna consciousness. Anyway, I apply that to every service: daily worship, cooking, cleaning, whatever you're doing. Management is probably the hardest one. I don't know. You're getting caught up in all kinds of making, scheme plans. I don't know, call it what you will. But whatever, that's a real surrender. I take my hat off to those devotees who are, sacrificing their life to trying to manage a spiritual organization in this world. It's much harder now than, at least my experience in it. In the beginning, it was quite easy. It's simple and easy. Now it's just a real sacrifice now, but a great sacrifice between other peace and each. Anyway, so whatever service you're in, try to hear Prabhupada's books. He is our life and soul, and he's there for us. And you just take shelter of him. It's like a little baby in the mother's lap, or the protective hand of the father when we take shelter of Prabhupada's books and read. Otherwise, we get caught away by our false ego, somebody else's behavior, the modes of nature around us, whatever it is. Yeah, Hare Krishna.
So again, the reading reminds us of, also you put it very beautifully, like that we should remind that actually Krishna is in the center. It's about Krishna. It's not about us and about how great we are, but it's about how great Krishna is. And by reading Prabhupada's books, we get reminded of that. That's beautiful.
When you associate with devotees, we won't mention names. I'll mention one name. That this devotee is no longer physically present. His name is Vishnu Goswami. He was an Indian sannyasi from Gujarat, who lived in England for a long time. And he was like very close to me. He was like physically like an uncle to me. We had a very sweet relationship. And whenever you came into his association, what did you do? Oh, how are you doing, Maharaj? There would be no question of talking. It was just Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam. Yeah, I saw him 5 days before he left the world. We were in what's that place called? Where's that place on the River Godavari? Famous place of pilgrimage. What's it called? I forgot. Oh my goodness, a beautiful place. The River Godavari flows through there. Anyway, whatever it is, that's where his home more or less was, around there. And he was there. And he left the world. Not many days later, he was rushed off to the back to the hospital and left his body. And he came in, he could hardly breathe or walk. And he was big smile on his face. And he was just getting everyone to recite the Bhagavatam. And even on his deathbed, they say Maharaj was just smiling and reciting Bhagavatam. And this is the goal of life. If we don't hear, how on earth are we going to remember Krishna at the time of death? We're not. Only by the grace, divine grace of the Lord, anything's possible. But we should do our part by filling our consciousness up with Krishna Katha, topics concerning Krishna. The whole Bhagavatam is based on that friction. What should we be thinking of at the time of death and 7 days a year, day and night? Srimad Bhagavatam. Mm-hmm. If we want to prepare ourselves for death, every moment we should be ready. When you're on the street, you're faced with death. In a sense, you could be drawn away by some advertisement, some pretty chick, whatever it is you see out there. Mind can be dragged away very easy, and our intelligence can follow in its footsteps. So we have to be very careful. We have to fill our consciousness up as much as we can with hearing Srila Prabhupada's books.
That's a beautiful example of Maharaj you gave, and how we should absorb ourselves in this Krishna Katha. And when we hear about such personalities who have so much taste, sometimes we wonder, how can we develop such a taste?
Yeah.
And sometimes devotees, when they read Prabhupada's books, they find it's boring or repetitive. And I have
great cure for insomnia, Prabhupada said. Oh no, I read that before. You have, if you think like that, it's like Thakur says with chanting japa. If you think you've finished your rounds, you haven't started them. And the same with Prabhupada's books. If you feel like that, we haven't actually started reading them. Really, we're just touching the surface. You're like getting the spray on the ocean. You haven't entered in. There's every word, Prabhupada said of these books is, there's unending, it's unlimited. We need each other's help. Devotees like you, and there's so many around them. I know Keshava Bharati, Maharaja, Burijan Prabhu, but there are so many others who are just so much, sharing, opening their hearts out to help other devotees to realize the importance of reading Prabhupada's books. Basically to associate with Prabhupada, to remove all the nonsense in our hearts, to awaken our real business. So how to awaken that taste? Well, taste comes from association. Taste also comes by serving those devotees. Serving devotees. In Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj would always say that the holy name of Bhagavatam is the same principle, comes from serving the spiritual master and serving the Vaishnavas. This is the gateway to actually developing a taste for hearing the holy name or hearing the Bhagavatam. You can't just hear it. We have to serve the devotees. The two things Mahaprabhu said are essential: service to Vaishnavas and service to the holy name. And that means service to the Bhagavatam also. Both. So that service to the Vaishnavas is very, very important. Realizations will come. And by their grace, a taste for hearing the books will come. We're hearing the subject of Krishna Katha. That's what Bhagavatam says. Shushushosha is the next verse. Shushushosha Dadanasya. Why am I quoting these verses? Because this was the most profound thing when I was an early devotee. This second chapter of the first canto, we used to read it every day. On traveling Sankirtan. This is 6 months down the line after joining. We had a traveling Sankirtan party, and every day we read this second canto. We learned the second canto off by heart. I can't remember many of the verses now, but we learned it off by heart, at least most of it. It was such a unshakable foundation in our devotional lives to have this second canto embedded in our consciousness. You know, it was so strong. Shushushosha Dhanasya Vasudeva Gadavichi Shanmahad Sevayavi Prapunatirti Nishevanata. By serving those devotees, those great devotees were freed of all vice, great service is done. By service, one, what happens?
Ruchi.
Yeah, ruchi. One gets a taste. A taste for what?
Katha ruchi.
Ruchi. Hearing the messages of Godhead. So they go hand in hand. Part of that service, essential part of that service, primary part of that service is to hear. But it also accompanies with menial or submissive, humble attitude, rendering practical service. If your service is to read given to you by your Gurudev, that's your service. That's your menial service. Otherwise, we have to realize that, you know, we're not above, you know, whatever is required to assist the Guru, to assist Prabhupada in spreading Krishna consciousness.
So through association and through service, we can
prayer. And by regular hearing, attending, you know, hearing classes or hearing Bhagavatam, then that comes. We have to make a regular effort to read regularly, schedule regular, comes from regulation, and especially through association. And practically applying it. Now, I would say that we already mentioned, utilizing what we hear in class or in conversations between us or in preaching publicly, whatever it may be. That's also part of service. It's also.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about that also. The application, how to ensure that we are able to apply what we read.
How to assure that we actually can apply what we read. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how can something be assured? Assure. Chastity. Okay, well, Prabhupada said that his secret was he didn't change anything his spiritual masters said. In our case, I can only speak from experience. Our inspiration, at least from whatever inspiration I received, was from those who got what I haven't got. I found that devotees were always so eager in these early years, at least in London. I see devotees were so eager, and that is contagious. Enthusiasm comes by basically association. So that was very contagious of passing it on, even if you didn't realize it. Sure, you're going to say the wrong thing. Sure, you're going to explain it, you know, maybe not the way it should be or the wrong time, place, and circumstance it comes from. But the endeavor has to be there. We can't put that aside just because I don't know or you don't have the experience. We have to start. We start where we are. And it was like, that was what I picked up on, that devotees really wanted to share what they'd heard or read with others. And they'd have to ask them what their inspiration was. I guess it's because Prabhupada did it always. Prabhupada was every single, even in managerial meetings, Prabhupada would bring, you know, Krishna Katha into the picture. It wasn't just some latest, you know, technique of management. It always had to be a Krishna conscious foundation to everything. And that's accompanying everything to keep us safe. As we tend to get proud of our latest invention or our latest, you know, brainwave or whatever it is. But really bringing that in and referring it to Prabhupada, not just speaking as if you're the knower, you're the speaker, you're the, you know, the great guru or something. It's, you know, Prabhupada would always refer, I'm not saying, Krishna's saying, my spiritual masters said, you know, so remembering this is all by the grace of Srila Prabhupada. We have nothing otherwise, absolutely nothing. We don't know anything. Speculation would be our only, say resolve. But Prabhupada has clarified everything. We repeat what Prabhupada has said. Prabhupada said in our own words, but not changing it in terms of what it is, you know, to repeat it. And even if all you do is read, just read it. I remember one devotee, he's also left his body now. And that was, he said, even if they do nothing else in class, just read Prabhupada's words, you know. It'll come by hearing from Prabhupada, because Prabhupada, you know, by associating with Prabhupada, you develop the qualities, that's what that verse says, of the pure devotees, which is the principle of hearing and chanting. So by hearing, the inspiration or the initiative to chant will also come if we hear from the right source. And Krishna, if we're sincere, Krishna will correct us if we're hearing the wrong way. There's no doubt about it.
So adopting that proper mood, and which attracts the mercy of Krishna, so then we can.
Association to us, we hear it, we get it from the pure devotees, or from those who are more advanced than ourselves.
Yeah.
I remember what Danavir Maharaj, he was perhaps not Maharaj then, I don't know, he wouldn't have been. But when he was a younger devotee, he was in LA. Perhaps you've interviewed him already, I don't know. But he may have said this. But when he was in LA with Vishnu Jam, Maharaj was the temple commander. And, as sweet as they can come, but he kept the devotees pretty busy. He didn't let them waste any time, not like now, where you kind of space around half the day, thinking I've done too much service. You haven't even started, boy. In those days, it was 24/7, And anyway, he kept the devotees pretty busy. So Danavar asked if he could have any extra time for reading. He said, no. But you make time. You make the time. I'll tell you, frankly, any of you listening now, and I can say myself for sure, we waste so much time in our day, honestly. And I won't say what doing, but I'm sure we waste a lot of time. And he found out that without changing his service, he was reading 2 hours a day. Didn't waste time. Instead of standing there waiting for someone to arrive, he'd have a book reading it. Instead of sitting in the car, kind of like when we were going, looking out the window, he was reading a book. Instead of sitting there, just waiting for the server to give me the gulab, he's reading a book, Okay, we can't say it's a bit fanatical, but it's just an example. It's like Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj gave 64 rounds for his Grihastha disciples, not for his sannyasis. If you know that, no? It was mainly for his Grihasthas. They said, but Gurudev, we have so much to do with Grihastha. We have no time. He said, I know how much time you have. That's why I've given you 64 rounds of that, so you don't waste your time. In other words, you space out. So it's fill in the gaps. It's not the reading Bhagavad books is fill in the gaps, but we can. That's one of the best things now. For years, I traveled with a deity. It was called a Kindle. It was the best. I say the best invention I knew up to that time. Was this Kindle, because all Prabhupada's books are on there. Every spare moment, you just open it, and there it is. You're reading where you left off. It's fantastic. Great invention. I don't say it replaces the books, but it is a great accompaniment.
That's a very profound point, that actually it's not so much a question of having no time, but it's more about using the time properly and being.
Don't waste your time. If you have a spare moment, chant Hare Krishna or read the Bhagavatam or whatever, but don't waste your time. We're wasting Krishna. Not that Krishna's wasted, but we're wasting the opportunity to be with Krishna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maharaj, for giving your valuable time to us, for sharing your realizations.
You made my time perhaps a little more valuable than usual. Most of my time is wasted. But you give me a chance at least to remember Prabhupada's books and pray that other devotees take more advantage than I have, that's for sure, of this opportunity to associate with Srila Prabhupada.
Do you have any final words, final wisdom you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, okay. By distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, Krishna is pleased, and he will also reciprocate, if you want, by giving you realizations when you read his books. The purpose of reading is not just to learn, we're not dhyanis. It's to change our hearts, to awaken the love of God, which is dormant within our hearts. And that awakening love of God depends on Krishna's mercy. And again, one of the most famous, not famous, but one of my favorite purports is in the 7th chapter of the 1st canto. I've even approached the lotus feet of the Lord. I'm still under the feet there in the 1st canto. I'm a worm, underground worm. So touching the bottom of the soles of Prabhupada's lotus feet there, or Krishna's lotus feet. Bhagavatam, takes us from the lotus feet up to the topmost smiling face of the Lord. But in that first canto where Prabhupada says the awakening of our dormant affection or our love for Krishna does not at all depend upon the mechanical process of hearing and chanting, but depends wholly and solely upon the mercy of the Lord. We've got to get that mercy, the mercy of the Lord, and constantly reminding ourselves to chant Hare Krishna. Prabhupada's books are full of reminders. Chant Hare Krishna. Trinada Peace in Nichena. Distribute these books. Preach Krishna consciousness. Spread this message. Do this. Krishna will give realization. Share these books with others. And share it amongst ourselves. And share it with ourselves also. We're also one of the people, supposed to be. And don't ignore ourselves. Charity begins at home. Physician, cure yourself, so to speak. How can we convince others to read if we don't read? And some Prabhupada will say, embarrassing him if you say, someone says, well, what's in the book? I don't know, I've never read it, but you read it. Yeah. It's a famous, abbreviated kind of statement of Prabhupada. We have to read these books, that we become alive. Wake up, sleeping souls. These books are Prabhupada's clarion call to wake us up from our dream-like illusions or false egotistical endeavors. Wake up. So I'm glad to see that you've woken up Krishna Premarupa Prabhu and you're waking everyone else up now. Keep up this good service, and thanks to all the sincere Vaishnavas who are sharing with you and with the rest of the world. Maybe one day I'll get their association or I'll take advantage of it. Let's see what Krishna's plans are.
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for your wonderful association. It was very enlivening.
Thank you very much. Come and wake us up in France, please. We have a big library here, but you have to bring a duster with you first.
Okay. I will certainly come to have your association, Maharaj. Thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada's books ki jai. Gaur Premanandi.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.